Franny K. Stein, Mad Scientist in Lunch Walks Among Us by Jim Benton. Chapter 1 Franny's House. The Stein family lived in the pretty pink house with the lovely purple shutters down at the end of Daffodil Street. Everything about the house was bright and cheery. Everything, that is, except the upstairs bedroom with the tiny round window. That room belonged to Franny K. Stein, and she liked to keep it dark and spooky and creepy. Every few days her mother would come in and redecorate Franny's bedroom with daisies and lilacs and pictures of lovely horses. It would always look so sweet and pretty. But by the very next day, Franny would somehow manage to make it look dark and creepy and spooky again. That was how she liked it. Like a dungeon complete with giant spiders and bats. Bats. Where does she get bats? Her mother would ask when she saw Franny's room. Is there a bat store around here or something? Of course, there wasn't a bat store around. The bats just kept showing up. The bats liked Franny's room, and Franny liked the bats. They're like rats with pterodactyl wings, she'd say. What's not to like? Chapter 2 Franny's Room. Franny's bedroom was really something special. It had big steaming test tubes, strange bubbling beakers, and a whole bunch of crackling electrical gizmos that Franny had made all by herself. Franny's room also had a giant tarantula cage, a snake house, and a tank where she raised a special breed of flying piranha. She couldn't imagine why anybody would want daisies and lilacs when they could have poison ivy and Venus flytraps. There's no comparison, she'd say, ducking one of her flying piranhas. Franny thought her room was so great and so wonderful and so perfect for her that she almost never wanted to leave it. But she had to, of course, for things like going outside, eating dinner, going to school, and using the bathroom, which is something Franny really liked to do. Whoops, that didn't sound right. It was going to school that Franny really liked. Chapter 3 New at School. Franny and her family had just moved to the house at the end of Daffodil Street, and she was new at school. She liked her teacher, Miss Shelley. She thought she would like the other kids too. But they really weren't very friendly toward Franny. The other kids weren't mean. They just had never known anyone like Franny. Nobody else jumped rope like Franny. Franny's lunches didn't look like other kids' lunches either. And when they played hide and seek, no one could find her. Franny could tell that the other kids were afraid of her, and that made her sad because she really did want to make friends. Her teacher, Miss Shelley, noticed what was happening, and one day she asked Franny to stay after class. Chapter 4 A Proposal. Miss Shelley was the nicest, smartest teacher Franny had ever had. Franny used to think that if only she dressed differently and wore her hair another way, she would be perfect. You're a wonderful student, Miss Shelley said. Thank you, Franny said. I like school, especially science, especially the gooey parts of science. I like the gooey parts too, Miss Shelley said, and they both laughed. I'm a mad scientist, you know, Franny whispered. That must be very rewarding, Miss Shelley said, but she didn't really believe that Franny was a real-life mad scientist. Franny could tell. But I wonder if you might be a little lonely sometimes. Miss Shelley continued. I am lonely sometimes, Franny admitted, but I don't understand the other kids, and I don't know how to make friends with them. I think you can figure it out, said Miss Shelley. You're smart. Franny folded her arms. I don't know, Miss Shelley. Think of it as an experiment, Miss Shelley said. Franny's eyes lit up. A wide grin crawled across her face. An experiment was the one thing she could just not resist, and Miss Shelley knew it. The experiment, Franny pointed into the air the way mad scientists do when they think about conducting an experiment, begins tomorrow. Chapter 5. The experiment begins. The next day, Franny came to school prepared to start her experiment. Before class, she observed some of the girls playing with dolls. Franny was delighted. She knew about dolls. She loved dolls. In fact, she loved them so much that she had even made some special modifications to the ones she had at home. She was just about to tell the other girls how Chumpalina could bite the heads off of their dolls when she noticed something. Their dolls were all kind of sweet and pretty. They all had long hair and flowery dresses. Not a single one of them oozed uck. They didn't ooze anything. Franny made a note to herself. Pretty, non-head-biting dolls, it said, and less oozing. At lunchtime, Franny sat down at the table with a bunch of kids. She was getting ready to take out her exquisitely delicious crab ravioli and pumpkin sauce when she made another observation. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches on her left, lunch meat sandwiches on her right. As far as Franny's eye could see was a carpet of soft, white, squishy sandwiches. No casseroles, no stews, no shish kebabs. Just sandwiches. Is this all they ever eat? She whispered to herself, and she made another note, squishy sandwiches. It said. Franny stuffed her lunch into the trash. During recess, the kids decided to play softball. I have the ball, one of them said, but we need a bat. Another one said. A bat, Franny thought. Finally, something I understand. She reached into her backpack to get one. Just then, a little boy ran past her with a baseball bat. Batter up, he shouted. Said Franny. There's more than one kind of bat. As her classmates started playing, she took out her notebook and made another note. A bat can also be a big stick you use to hit things, she wrote. After school, Franny picked up her backpack full of customized dolls and spiders and notes and bats and headed home to analyze the data she had gathered that day. Chapter 6. Back at the lab. Back in her room, Franny looked over her notes. She made some calculations and puzzled over her findings. Nice kids, she said finally. Kind of boring, but really nice. That night, Franny dreamed about how much fun it would have been to play dolls with those girls or to trade sandwiches at lunch. Even softball looked like fun, in spite of the fact that they used the kind of bat that didn't have cute, veiny wings. Chapter 7. Making Monsters. Early the next morning, as she was getting ready for school, Franny pulled down her copy of A Treasury of Monster-Making Techniques and turned to the chapter on transformations. In particular, she studied the part that explained how to transform a little girl mad scientist into something else. I know just what to do, she said, and she began combining honey, vanilla, jelly beans, and pink soda. She poured the formula into a tall, pretty glass decorated with happy sheep holding a puppy wearing diapers. Ugh, she said. How cute can you get? She put the mixture into one of her inventions and programmed in her notes. The machine began to hum and shake and buzz and bake, and then finally it binged just like a microwave when your microwave popcorn is ready. Franny gazed at the potion. She held her nose and drank it. She ran to the mirror and watched a strange transformation take place. When Franny came downstairs to breakfast, her mom took one look at her and dropped her toast. Her dad choked on his coffee. Her brother's eyes almost popped out of his head. Franny, her mother said, you look so nice. Franny did look nice. Her hair was cute, her dress was pretty, her shoes were adorable. She didn't really look like Franny anymore, but she looked nice. Kind of. Thanks, Mom, she said. Here's a description of something I'd like prepared for lunch. It's a strange and horribly exotic, but I appreciate it if you could give it a try. Her mom looked at the recipe that Franny had given her. This says jelly and peanut butter between white bread slices, she said. I'm pretty sure I can make this, Franny. I've been making it for years. Excellent, Franny said, and she rubbed her hands together in a mad scientist way. Chapter 8. A Transformed Franny. Before school, Franny met some of the girls from her class. Franny had a modified Ciampolina with her. Now Ciampolina played happy music and squirted perfume and glitter and came with her own nail polish and a rainbow-colored unicorn with a long tail you could braid. The other girls loved Ciampolina and crowded around her. Franny thought it was fun playing with the girls, but deep down, she missed the old Ciampolina. At lunchtime, Franny pulled out her PB&J sandwich. The peanut butter had been artfully smoothed and the jelly had been applied equally from one corner to the other. The bread was so blazingly white that Franny needed sunglasses to look at it. Her mom had even trimmed the crust, and the other kids noticed this, smiled with approval. Franny took a bite and found it to be totally, completely, and incredibly average. Uninteresting, and no big deal. She had expected so much more. But her experiment seemed to be working, so she finished the mushy sandwich. At recess, Franny suggested they play softball. She consulted her notes quickly and added, I think it best we use a ball instead of a skull, or a giant squid eyeball, or something gruesome like that. The other kids were a bit puzzled, but they agreed. Franny had fun playing with them, but deep down she knew the game would have been much more fun with a skull or giant squid eyeball. After school, the kids all said goodbye, and a few even asked her to come over to their houses and play. It was great to be asked, but Franny had to hurry straight home and analyze her day. She was happy. The other kids liked her, even if it was only a transformed her. Chapter 9. Lunch Doesn't Agree with Me. The next day at school, while the kids were doing their math problems, Miss Shelley took Franny over to one side and talked to her. How's the experiment going? She asked. It's great. I understand them, and I think we're becoming friends. They seem to like me better if I just go along with things they like. Are you sure that's for the best? Miss Shelley asked. Well, that's what the data seems to suggest, Franny said, and showed Miss Shelley some graphs to back it up. But I like the real you. Miss Shelley was about to continue when a piercing scream tore through the lunchroom. The trash can, a little girl shrieked. It's moving. Franny's mad scientist brain raced. That was the trash can in which she had dumped her crab ravioli and pumpkin sauce 2 days ago. But an old lunch all by itself was not enough to start a paranormal reaction. Who else put something in the can? Franny said. I spat out my gum in there, one girl said. I threw a pair of old gym shoes in there, another boy said. I saw the janitor dump some trash in there, another girl said. Egad, said Franny. That was close. Well, as long as nobody put an unstable industrial waste in there, we should be fine. Oh yeah, said one little boy. I forgot. I put some unstable industrial waste in there. Gadzooks, Franny shouted. That is the exact formula for a giant monstrous fiend. The other kids looked at her. They looked scared, not just of the mention of giant monstrous fiend, although the prospect of a giant monstrous fiend was no comfort. They were also afraid of Franny. They were looking at her the way they used to, before they became good friends. I mean, Franny stammered. That's what I would think if I was a weird mad scientist type little girl, which of course I'm not. They all smiled at her again. Just then the trash can erupted like a volcano. As the smoke settled, the kids saw, for the first time, the type of giant monstrous fiend that a mad scientist type girl would have predicted. Chapter 10. That's no jack-o'-lantern. The giant monstrous fiend stood there chewing gum and breathing angrily. Its head was a pumpkin and its body looked like a crab. It was wearing the old shoes and it was dripping with industrial waste. Franny hoped it would just jump out the window and go away, and to her surprise, the pumpkin crab monster jumped out the window and went away. Unfortunately, it grabbed Miss Shelley before it left. With a crash and a scream, the pumpkin crab monster and her teacher were gone. The kids just stood there. They didn't know how to help. A few tried crying, a few tried screaming. One tried wetting his pants, although later on he admitted he had no idea why he thought that might help. Some of Franny's new friends hugged her and shrieked, but Franny didn't shriek. Franny thought. Out the window, the pumpkin crab monster was climbing the flagpole with Miss Shelley. There was no way that Miss Shelley was going to get away from the monster thing. It was holding her tight, and it was climbing higher and higher. Franny looked at her friends. She really liked them, and she was happy they liked her. She had hoped they would always be her friends, but still, she knew what she had to do. Franny reached into her backpack and pulled out a vial. It said antidote on it. Guys, she said gently, if you all get your lunches, I think I know what we might be able to do. The kids ignored her. They just ran around in little circles, getting more and more scared and confused. Guys, really, I think I know what we need, Franny spoke a little louder this time, but they still ignored her. We need a fireman, one girl said. We need a superhero, one boy said. We need dry pants, said you-know-who. Franny stood up. Outside, lightning cracked. What we need, she said, is a mad scientist, which I am. She uncorked the antidote and drank it. She began to cough and sputter and spit. She fell on the ground and scrunched down into a little ball. She stood up and felt herself return to normal. Franny, the little girl mad scientist, was back. Chapter 11. It's mad science time. Franny looked at the kids. They looked even more afraid of her now than they ever had before. She thought about trying to be sweet or less scary. But that just wasn't going to get things done. Do as I command, she said in her most scary mad scientist voice. Go get your lunches. The kids stopped running in circles and ran to get their lunches. Mad scientists, even when they're only 4 feet tall, can be very persuasive. Put the bread in one pile and the lunch meat in the other, she barked. The kids did as they were told and quickly disassembled their lunches. Franny was busy examining the bottom of the trash can. I think there's just enough of this unstable industrial waste left to do the trick. Franny worked fast. She told the kids exactly how to arrange their lunch meat and how to get the bread ready. They were afraid, but they did what she said, and they did it quickly. Being the only mad scientist around, she was the expert on unstable industrial waste. So she took care of that personally. Then Franny pulled the needle and thread from her backpack. This will require absolute silence, she said, and the kids watched her begin stitching the lunch meat together. Franny worked quickly as the kids watched in terror, occasionally handing her additional slices of salami or bologna when she so instructed. They knew they were watching something not of this world, something that no human eyes had ever seen before, and in that moment, the pants wetter decided to let loose one more time. Chapter 12. Ham I Am. Finally, Franny walked solemnly across the room and washed snips of ham and smears of mustard off her hands in the sink. She sighed a deep, satisfied sigh and turned to gaze on her creation. There, standing motionless in the middle of the classroom, was a giant monster thing made entirely of glistening, delicious bologna, salami, pickle loaf, and ham. The time had come to provide the creature with the awesome power source it would need to come alive. Franny grasped its salami nose and slid 2 batteries up its nostrils. Awaken, she commanded. The creature's eyes slowly opened. It growled and looked at Franny. The kids clung to one another in fear. The flagpole, Franny ordered, and the creature began walking stiffly toward the wall. With a mighty punch, it smashed its way through and headed outside. Bread, Franny yelled, and the kids, following Franny's plan, began pushing a pile of bread over to the base of the flagpole. The lunch meat creature grabbed the pole and shook it. Miss Shelley screamed, and the kids gasped. Shake harder, Franny commanded. The lunch meat creature shook until finally the pumpkin crab monster dropped Miss Shelley. Chapter 13. The Final Inning. Franny watched calmly as Miss Shelley fell toward the ground screaming. Then, with the loudest puff sound anyone had ever heard, Miss Shelley fell right into the big squishy pile of white bread, completely unharmed. Franny turned to the lunch meat creature. Now, my lunch meat abomination, go get that pumpkin-headed creep. The lunch meat creature grabbed the flagpole tightly and pulled it until bologna-flavored sweat dripped off its forehead. Finally, with a monstrous groan, the lunch meat creature ripped the flagpole right out of the ground, causing a very angry crab monster to fall and hit the pavement with a ground-shattering crash. The pumpkin crab monster got to its feet and growled. It began stomping towards the kids. It was almost on top of them when Franny, the only kid that did not look worried, calmly whistled. Suddenly, a cloud of bats flew down from the sky and grabbed the pumpkin crab monster by the arms. "Batter up," she said. The bats flew fast as they could with the pumpkin crab monster, and they headed right for the lunch meat creature who had the flagpole up on its shoulder. The bats dropped their burden just in time for the lunch meat creature to bring the pole around like a giant baseball bat and connect with the pumpkin crab monster as if it were a giant, stinky softball. With a loud crack, it went hurtling off into the sky, never to be seen or heard from again. "Home run," shouted Franny. Then Franny turned around and saw the shocked and horrified kids hurtling around an equally shocked and horrified Miss Shelley. They looked more scared of her than ever. Franny had the sad, sinking feeling that she had saved the day but had lost all of her friends. Chapter 14. Easy Come, Easy Go. I probably take the lunch meat creature apart and make your sandwiches again, Franny offered weakly. "And sorry about the flagpole, Miss Shelley," Franny said, "and about the wall my lunch meat creature smashed through." "Sorry about your pants, kid," she said to the boy who had wet his pants and who was now getting pretty tired of people talking about it. The kids all just stood there, trembling. They didn't say a thing. Franny turned away and walked home, sadder and lonelier than ever before. Chapter 15. Back to the grind. The next day, Franny went to school as herself. There was no reason to pretend anymore. The kids were afraid of her and probably always would be. Worse yet, Miss Shelley was also probably afraid of her now, too. Franny opened the door to her classroom slowly. Suddenly, a giant cheer went from the kids inside. "Hooray for Franny," they yelled. "Hooray, hooray, hooray." Franny looked around, stunned. The kids were all hugging her and thanking her for saving them. "Thank you," Miss Shelley said as she hugged her closest of all. Franny was shocked. She fumbled over her words. You're welcome?" "Your monster fixed the flagpole and the wall," Miss Shelley said. "And it did such a great job, the principal wants to hire it to work here." The lunch meat monster waved and grinned proudly. "You're the coolest, Franny," the kids shouted. "You're not scared of me?" Franny asked. "Well, it would be hard not to be a little scared. I mean, you did make a monster out of cold cuts," one girl said. "But still, you're our friend. and that makes it all okay. Friends, Franny said. Yeah, I'm your friend, just the way I am, just the way you are. Friends. Chapter 16. Weird, but I still like them. They didn't always like the same things, but they were all still friends after that. The other girls decided that Champollion and Ouzette were actually pretty fun. And Franny learned how to enjoy an occasional peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And together they figured out a way to play softball with both kinds of bats. And it was an unusual friendship, but a great one. And considering how experiments often end up for mad scientists, Franny thought this one had gone pretty darn well. The end.